This is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and military operations depicted are entirely fictional. Heat in the dark. That was the first wrong thing. 4 a.m, August in western Kansas, and the air still carried the day's fever like a held breath. Callan Ferris stood at the kitchen sink, filling a glass of water he did not yet want, listening to the windmill creak its slow complaint outside the window. Finn lay near the screen door, ears flat, jaw on pause. Then one ear lifted. A single bark. Short, clipped, gone before the echo found the walls. Finn did not bark. Not at coyotes, not at trucks on the gravel road, not at thunder rolling off the Flint Hills. In 3 years on this land, Callan could count the dog's barks on one hand and still have fingers left for a fist. He set down the glass. Outside, the porch boards still held warmth from yesterday's sun. Dust and dry grass, and the faint mineral smell of the stock tank. That was what Kansas smelled like in August, like a body running low on something it would not name. The yard was dark. The sky was not. Stars sat fat and low across a horizon so flat it looked ruled with a carpenter's level. A shape at the edge of the property, moving wrong. Callan's hand found the porch rail. His eyes adjusted. The shape became a boy, tall, too thin for his frame, stumbling up the gravel track from the county road with one arm clamped across his ribs and the other holding something long and narrow. Finn was already down the steps, not running, walking with that fixed, deliberate gait he used when he had decided something before Callan had. "Hey, stop there!" The boy stopped, swayed once. In the starlight, Callan saw a face too young for the bruise darkening its left side. Jaw swelling, lip split and crusted. 17, maybe. Eyes wide, not with fear, with urgency. "They buried it!" The boy's voice cracked on the second word. "The whole thing? Under the East Access Road." He held out the long object, a plastic tube capped at both ends, caked with reddish soil. A core sample. Then his knees gave. Callan caught him the way he'd caught swimmers in 40-degree water. Under the arms, weight against his chest, one step back to absorb the drop. 18 years of pulling people from oceans, and he still led with the same grip, still braced the same way, still felt the same cold clarity settle into his hands. Finn stood beside them. He looked at Callan, then at the boy. Then he lowered himself to the ground next to the kid's legs, pressed his flank against the boy's hip, and did not move again. "Easy, I got you." He carried the boy inside, set him on the couch, checked his pupils, his breathing, watched his ribs expand. No catch, no wet sound. No guarding beyond the bruise. Not broken. Dehydrated. Exhausted. Scared past the point where scared still showed on the face. The core sample lay on the kitchen table where the boy had dropped it, still holding the heat of whatever ground it had come from. "Who are you?" "Jem." The boy's eyes were closing. "Jem Harkin, from the Harkin place off Route 8. "Who hit you, Jem?" But the boy was gone. Not unconscious, asleep, the sudden animal sleep of a body that had outrun its fuel. Finn stayed beside the couch, chin on the cushion's edge, amber eyes tracking Callan across the room. Callan looked at the core sample, then out the window, south, where the pump station's security lights made a faint orange smear on the horizon. Whoever had hit this kid wanted him gone from there, which meant there was something worth going back to. Morning brought the heat back like a debt collector, early, certain, without sympathy. By 7, the porch thermometer read 91, and the light had that bleached white quality that turned everything beyond 50 yards into shimmer. Callan Ferris had lived on this 40-acre plot for 3 years. Before that, 18 years in the United States Coast Guard, aviation survival technician, rescue swimmer, the job that meant jumping from helicopters into open water so that other people did not have to die in it. Station Kodiak, Station Clearwater, Station Cape Cod. A deployment to Bahrain with a port security detachment that no one back home found interesting enough to ask about. He'd retired a chief petty officer with a torn rotator cuff, tinnitus in his left ear, and a scar along his right forearm where a hoist cable had opened the skin during a hurricane rescue off the Florida coast. The scar was pale now, raised, smoother than the rest of him. Kansas had been an accident. A friend of a friend knew someone selling 40 acres with irrigation rights, and Callan had driven out to look at it because looking at something was easier than deciding anything else. He stayed because the silence here was different from the silence at sea. At sea, silence was the absence of an engine, and the absence of an engine meant something had gone wrong. Here, silence meant the wind was resting. That was all. He grew hard red winter wheat and a little sorghum. He consulted on irrigation systems for neighboring farms, pipe layouts, flow rates, center pivot calibration. He fixed things with his hands and did not fix the other things, and most days that arrangement held. Jem slept until the smell of coffee woke him, and even then he surfaced slowly, one hand finding the bruise on his jaw before his eyes opened. Finn had not moved from the couch's edge. When the boy sat up, the dog lifted his head and watched him with the grave attention of a creature who had already decided this person belonged in the house. "Your dog won't stop staring at me." "He does that. Means he's made up his mind about you." "Good or bad?" With Finn, those are the same category. Callan set a glass of water and 2 ibuprofen on the table. Jem took both without asking what they were, which told Callan something about the kind of year the kid had been having. Harlan Crossing sat 11 miles east on Route 8. Callan knew the town at a distance. A face you saw at the hardware store, but never at dinner. Grain elevator on the north end. Diner called Rose. A water board office in a beige building no one had painted since the Clinton administration. Small. Dry. Getting drier. He called the number Jem gave him for his mother. Della Harkin arrived in a pickup the color of creek mud, driving faster than the gravel wanted. She came up the porch steps with the compressed energy of a woman who had been awake since the moment her son hadn't come home and had spent every hour since converting fear into motion. Mid-40s, sun-lined face, hands that knew work. She saw Jem on the couch, and her whole body did something that was not a sigh and not a collapse, just a brief reorganization of weight, a shifting from search mode into found. What happened? He showed up here around 4, bruised but not broken. I'm a retired Chief Petty Officer, Coast Guard, some medical training. He's all right. Her eyes moved from Callan to Finn to the core sample still on the kitchen table. Her jaw tightened. Why was he at your place? I was hoping you could tell me that. Della looked at her son. Jem sat up straighter and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The silence held the smell of coffee and ibuprofen, and the particular tension of a mother deciding how much fury to spend in front of a stranger. He's been going out to that pump station. I told him to stop. He won't stop. Mom, you won't. She turned back to Callan. Thank you for taking him in. I'll handle it from here. She helped Jem to the truck. Finn followed them to the porch edge and sat there, watching the pickup disappear down the gravel road in a plume of khaki dust. His father would have known what to do. Della had said it getting into the truck, almost to herself, a phrase worn smooth by repetition. But his father's dead. Callan stood on the porch until the dust settled. The core sample was still on his kitchen table. He should have given it back. He hadn't. He did not examine why. Finn came inside, circled twice beneath the kitchen table, and lay down with his nose near the tube of reddish earth, as though guarding evidence he had not yet been asked to guard. The soil told him what the county wouldn't. Callan held the core sample under the workshop light that afternoon, turning it slowly in hands still marked with the grease of yesterday's irrigation repair. 18 years in the Coast Guard had not made him a geologist, but 12 of those years working rescue operations around every kind of water: ocean, river, ice shelf, flooded harbor, had given him something else, a feel for what water did to ground, how it sat, how it left. This sample was wrong. The lower third should have been dark, dense, saturated, the signature of a healthy water table within reach. Instead, it was pale, powdery, dry past the point of recent drought. This ground had been emptied from below. A knock at the workshop door. Finn's ears rotated once, just the left one, then the right, and his tail stayed level, which meant familiar. Jem stood in the doorway, backpack over one shoulder, squinting into the workshop light. The bruise on his jaw had gone the color of a late plum. Does your mother know you're here? She thinks I'm at the library. Are you at the library? A beat, the faintest flicker of something that might have been a smile on any other face. I am at the library, just not every Tuesday. Callan set the core sample down. What do you know about what's happening out at that pump station? Jem shrugged off the backpack and pulled out a notebook. Not a school notebook, a field notebook, the kind with the waterproof cover and grid paper. It fell open to pages dense with handwritten numbers, dates, well depths. 3 months of data collected from 12 different residential wells in a 20-mile radius around the Platte Basin pump station. Where'd you learn to pull a core sample? YouTube. Callan almost laughed. Almost. All right, show me what you have. What Jem had was this. Every well he'd tested was dropping. The ones closest to the pump station were dropping fastest, 8 feet in 4 months. The ones farthest out were slower, 2 or 3 feet, but the direction was the same. Down. All of them. Like the land was being drained from underneath through a single straw. The pump station's extraction permit is public record, Jem said, pointing at a number circled 3 times in red. 1,200 acre-feet per year. That's what they're licensed for. And what are they actually pulling? Jem looked at him. I don't know exactly, but the math doesn't work. Not at 1,200. Not even close. Finn had come to stand between them during the explanation, nose near the open notebook, sampling the air above the pages as though data had a scent. His nostrils worked in quick, deliberate pulses, the same way he smelled unfamiliar ground, cataloging. Callan closed the notebook and set it on the workbench. If the aquifer's dropping this fast, every well in a 20-mile radius goes dry by next summer. Every one. Jem nodded once. He already knew. He had known for 3 months and 11 days, and no one had listened. You need to stay away from that pump station. The boy's face closed like a door. You sound like every adult who ever told me to wait. Callan looked at him. 17, wearing his dead father's flannel with the sleeves rolled twice. And he had done more field work in 3 months than the county water board had done in 3 years. I'm not telling you to wait. I'm telling you to let me look at this before you go back there and get worse than a bruise. The door stayed closed, but the boy did not leave. That was something. The water board office in Harlan Crossing smelled of carpet adhesive and central air pushed too hard through ducts too small. A framed photo of the Ogallala Aquifer cross-section hung behind the reception desk. Sun faded, its blues gone milky. Callan studied it while he waited. The aquifer had been the largest underground water reserve in North America once. Now, it was a diagram in a frame behind a woman named Carol, who was on her lunch break. Callan sat in a plastic chair across from Dean Sutter, who occupied his desk chair with the practiced comfort of a man who had been the answer to every question in this building for longer than most people remembered the questions. 60s, broad face, farmer's tan on thick forearms, a waterboard chair who still looked like he'd rather be on a tractor, which was either genuine or the most effective camouflage in Tillman County. Help you, Mr. Ferris? Callan, right? The irrigation fella from up on the Keeler Road? That's right. I wanted to ask about the Platte Basin extraction permits, public record stuff. Sutter smiled, a good smile, open, unhurried. Of course, everything's within limits, checked quarterly. Mind if I see the reports? The smile stayed. The eyes changed. Not a lot, just the difference between a window and a window with someone standing behind it. I can have Carol pull those for you. Might take a few days. We're short-staffed. Summer, you know. I'll wait. Like I said. Sutter opened a desk drawer, closed it without removing anything. Few days. Callan thanked him and left. In the parking lot, the sun hit his face and arms with the flat, even pressure of a hand laid against skin. He unlocked the truck. Finn sat in the passenger seat, ears forward, watching something Callan couldn't see. Then the dog stood. Slowly, His whole body went rigid. Not fear, not aggression, just the total stillness of an animal who had registered a thing and was deciding what it meant. His tail dropped an inch. Callan checked the mirrors. A pickup truck, white, clean, newer than anything in this town needed to be, sat 3 rows back in the lot. It had not been there when he'd gone in. He pulled onto the road. The white truck did not follow. It did not need to. It already knew where he lived. Dust on the wind and the smell of turned earth. That was the evening. Callan drove the section roads with Finn riding shotgun, windows down, visiting the wells Jem's notebook had mapped. Heck Morrow's place was the 3rd stop. The farmhouse sat low against the plain. White paint gone the color of old bone, a windmill clicking overhead with the patience of a metronome nobody had asked to stop. Sunflowers lined the south fence, heads heavy, bowed toward a ground that no longer had much to offer them. The irrigation pivot in the east field stood motionless. A center pivot system could cover a quarter section in a day, and this one had been still long enough for a barn swallow to build a nest in the pivot joint. Heck Morrow himself stood at the wellhead, hauling a bucket up by hand because the electric pump had given out 2 weeks ago, and the county repair schedule, he said, was a work of fiction more imaginative than anything on television. 70s. Leatherface. The kind of man whose body had been shaped entirely by the work it had done, so that standing still, he looked like a verb someone had paused mid-sentence. Been here 50 years. Heck let the bucket rest on the well cap and peered into it. Half full. Silty. Well never dropped like this, not in the drought of 012. Not even in the 80s, when half the county packed up. Callan measured. His irrigation background gave him the tools, and his CG maritime engineering training gave him the instinct for flow. Where water went, how fast, what it left behind. He lowered a weighted line, waited for the slack, pulled it up. Marked the depth. Did it twice more to confirm. The reading matched Jem's data within 6 inches. When did you first notice? Spring. Pump started pulling air. That's not right. A well this deep don't pull air unless something underneath's changed. Heck scratched the back of his neck. Called Sutter about it. He said it was seasonal. Seasonal. He repeated the word with the inflection of a man tasting something that had gone bad. Callan pulled the line up again and coiled it around his forearm. The rope was old, hemp fiber, and it burned through the crease of his palm with a small scraping sound. Wet fiber on calloused skin. That sound. Not the sound itself, the motion. A hand pulling something heavy from depth, and the thing at the end of it coming up wrong, too light, already lost. He was in the helicopter, the HH-60 Jayhawk, Sector Kodiak, February air at -30 with the wind chill. Below them, the Bering Sea was black and white and had no interest in mercy. 2 distress signals, 1 aircraft. The trawler with 3 fishermen, 5 miles northeast. The sailboat with 2 civilians, 8 miles east. Protocol was clear. The senior officer, Lieutenant Ames, good man, careful man, the kind who read regulation as devotion, had looked at Callan and said, "We take the trawler first. 3 souls. Closer." Callan had argued. The sailboat's 2 occupants were younger, less experienced. The water was colder in that current. Hypothermia tables said 45 minutes before incapacitation at that temperature, and they had already been in the water for 30. Ames had said, "We go by the numbers, Chief." They saved the 3 fishermen. It took 22 minutes. They turned east. The helicopter's searchlight found the sailboat capsized, hull up, and the girl clinging to a life ring, with her teeth chattering so violently the rescue swimmer in the water, that was Callan, could hear it over the rotor wash. The boy was in the basket when they hoisted him. 19 years old, blonde hair gone dark with seawater. His name was Keegan Moss. He had been in the water 47 minutes. Hypothermia protocol said survival was possible at 47 minutes. Protocol said a lot of things. The boy's lips were blue, and his eyes were open, and his chest was not moving. And those facts had been true for long enough that CPR was a formality performed out of duty and grief, and the absolute inability to accept that numbers could be right and still be wrong. Callan had written the after-action report. He had used the correct terminology. He had not written, "I told them." He had not written, "The math was right and the kid was still dead." He had written, "Decision consistent with established triage protocols. All procedures followed." Finn's shoulder against his hip. Warm, solid, present tense. The dog had come to stand beside him without being called. 70 pounds of insistence that the world was still this place, this evening, this well on Heck Morrow's farm, where the rope had stopped burning because Callan had stopped pulling. "Yeah, I'm here." Heck was watching him with the careful blankness of a man who recognized the weather on another man's face and knew better than to name it. Water don't lie. Heck set the bucket down and straightened slowly, one hand on the small of his back. People do. Callan drove home with both hands on the wheel and the window open because the wind helped. Not with forgetting, with returning. Finn rode beside him with his nose near Callan's wrist, which was where the dog always put his nose when the past had visited and not yet left. The road was straight, and the sunset was the color of a wound closing, and Callan drove through it without speaking until the tires hit his own gravel, and the windmill came back into view, and the present agreed to take him back. The trespass letter arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered by a man in a pressed shirt who drove a sedan too clean for Tillman County and knocked on Della Harkin's door at 8 in the morning like inconvenience was a service he was proud to provide. Callan heard about it 20 minutes later when Della called, her voice carrying that particular compression of a woman trying to hold fury and fear in the same breath. "They're charging Jem. Trespass. Criminal trespass on Platte Basin property." "He's 17. He's a kid." "I'll be there in 15 minutes. At the Harkin place, Jem sat on the front step with his elbows on his knees and his jaw set at an angle that looked borrowed from someone older. Della paced the porch behind him, phone in one hand, the letter in the other, reading it again as though a second pass might change the language. Finn jumped out of the truck before Callan could say stay. He walked past Callan, past the porch steps, and sat down next to Jem. Positioned himself between the boy and the front door, the same stance he used between Callan and any direction he considered unresolved. Jem looked down at the dog. His hand moved, then stopped, as though he wasn't sure the gesture was allowed. Finn solved it by pressing his head into the boy's palm. "Who sent the letter?" Della held it out. The letterhead read, "Platte Basin Agricultural Holdings." Below it, a law firm out of Wichita. The language was polite, precise, and designed to terrify a single mother and her teenage son without ever raising its voice. "This is a scare letter. No court date, no filing number. They want you scared enough to stop." "Well, I'm not stopping," Jem said. "You don't fight a man with lawyers by yelling louder." Callan sat down on the step beside him. Finn stayed between them, a 70-pound mediator with no opinion and absolute loyalty. You fight him by knowing what he's hiding and making sure other people know too. I already know what he's hiding. You have numbers in a notebook. That's not the same thing. He looked at the boy, the flannel, the field notebook in the backpack. The split lip almost healed. Evidence that can't be verified is just a story. That's something they taught us in the Coast Guard. A distress signal without coordinates is just noise. Jem picked up a piece of gravel and turned it between his fingers. Small, precise movements. A habit, Callan guessed, from 3 months of measuring things nobody wanted measured. My dad used to say the well tells you the truth before the county does. Smart man. He was. He also died on a tractor doing a repair he could have waited a week to finish. Jem flicked the gravel into the yard. He wasn't good at waiting either. The sentence opened something Callan hadn't expected and closed it just as fast. He filed it. The boy's courage was not recklessness. It was inheritance. The fear of waiting, passed down from a man who had waited once too few times, or once too many. Jem stared at the gravel, processing. Inside the house, Della's phone rang. She went in to answer it, her footsteps carrying the weight of a woman whose list of problems had just grown by one item she could not afford. That afternoon, Callan saw him for the first time. He was sitting in Rose's diner with a cup of coffee he hadn't ordered, waiting for Della's callback, when a man walked in who did not belong to this town the way the others did. Tall, mid-50s, silver at the temples, a charcoal sport coat that had never been inside a feed store, boots that had never been inside mud. Garrett Nolan. He moved through the diner, shaking hands with the easy rhythm of a man who understood that every handshake in a town this size was a small deposit in a bank only he intended to use. Farmers, waitresses, the girl behind the register. He spoke to each of them, and each of them smiled, and each smile had a different shape of caution in it. Near the counter, he leaned toward a farmer Callan didn't know and said something low. "Cooperation's a lot cheaper than litigation." The farmer laughed. The laugh did not reach his hands, which stayed wrapped around his coffee cup. Nolan turned and caught Callan watching. Their eyes met across the diner's length, and Nolan's expression did something efficient. It acknowledged, assessed, and dismissed in a single motion. Then he left. The diner exhaled. Callan's coffee had gone cold. Finn lay under the table with his eyes closed, but his ears were up. The left one angled toward the door Nolan had just walked through. "Yeah." Callan pushed the cup away. "I saw him too. Gravel and wind and the smell of wheat stubble. Callan drove home with the windows down and the evening light making long amber corridors between the fields. On the way, he passed the church, small, white clapboard, its steeple the only vertical thing in a mile of horizontal. The parking lot was empty. The front door was open. Just open. Left that way in places where the heat was worse than the risk. Finn turned his head toward it as they passed. Callan did not slow down. His phone rang at the mailbox, a number he didn't recognize. Ferris. Mr. Ferris, this is Garrett Nolan, Platte Basin Agricultural Holdings. The voice was warm, measured, corporate, the kind of warmth someone had practiced until it no longer required effort. I hear you're the irrigation man out on Keeler Road. I consult. What can I do for you? Well, I'll be direct. We could use someone with your background. Water systems, flow management, aquifer dynamics. We're expanding our monitoring program, and I think you'd find the compensation worth your time. I'm not looking for work, of course. But if you ever are, well, this county runs on water, Mr. Ferris, and water runs through our permits. The line held a beat of silence that felt like a room with a locked door in it. I understand water fine, Mr. Nolan. I'm sure you do. Good evening, Mr. Ferris. The call ended. Callan stood by the mailbox in the last of the light, phone cooling in his hand. The wheat field across the road was gold going bronze in the low sun, and the shadows of the fence posts ran long and thin across the gravel. A beautiful evening. The kind that made you forget the thing you had just been told, if you let it. He did not let it. The next morning, he drove to the county records office and requested well permits and geological surveys for Tillman County, going back 5 years. The clerk, a young woman with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, typed for a while, frowned, typed again. Those files were transferred to State Archive last year. I can put in a request, but it takes 4 to 6 weeks. Who authorized the transfer? She checked the screen. Dean Sutter, water board chair. Callan thanked her and walked outside into heat that felt personal. Finn was in the truck, watching the records office door with the patient focus of an animal who knew that waiting was a form of work. The man who said everything was within limits made sure no one could check. Finn tilted his head, one ear up, one ear sideways. It was, Callan had learned, the dog's way of acknowledging a statement without endorsing it. Jem was already at the farm when Callan got home, sitting on the tailgate of Della's pickup, with his notebook open and a look on his face that said he had made a decision Callan was not going to like. He wore the same flannel, his father's, Callan was certain now, the way it hung past his wrists, the way the collar had been shaped by a neck wider than his own. I'm not stopping. You can help, or you can watch. Callan looked at him. 17. Roe Harkins flannel. 3 months and 11 days of data nobody had asked for. The bruise on his jaw had faded to a greenish stain, like something the soil had left there. All right. But we do this my way. Documented, verifiable, coordinates on every sample, timestamps on every reading. If we're going to tell people their water is dying, We're going to tell them in a language no one can dismiss." Jem closed the notebook, opened it again. "Deal." Finn jumped down from the truck and walked to Jem, sniffed his hand once, and sat beside him on the tailgate, as though a contract had been signed, and he intended to witness. "He likes you," Callan said. "He likes that I sit still." Almost a smile. Almost. Callan went inside and came back with two things: a GPS unit and a waterproof evidence bag. And then he stopped. He went back inside one more time, opened the top drawer of the bureau in the hallway, beneath the discharge papers and the expired car insurance and a photograph of a helicopter crew he did not look at. His hand found it by touch. A small steel whistle on a braided lanyard. Coast Guard rescue whistle. Standard issue survival vest. He'd carried it for 11 years, in helicopters and on cutters, and once in a pocket during a funeral he did not talk about. He brought it outside and held it out. "You're going into places alone. Sound carries farther than a voice out here. If something goes wrong, blow this." Jem took the whistle, turned it over once. It was scratched along one side, worn smooth on the other. Warm from the drawer and from every year that had held it before his. He ran a thumb across the stamped letters on the back. USCG. And looked up. What if nothing goes wrong? Then you'll never need it. But you'll have it. Where'd you carry it? Inside my vest, over here. Callan touched the left side of his chest. Close enough to reach with one hand in the water. Jem put the lanyard over his head and tucked the whistle under his shirt, against his sternum, where it lay hidden and present, and carrying a weight that had nothing to do with steel. Finn watched this transaction with his ears forward and his amber eyes steady, nose twitching once at the metal's old scent, filing it away somewhere in the catalog of things he had been asked to remember. Callan told himself it was preparation. He told himself he was equipping the boy the way a senior swimmer equipped a junior before open water. He did not examine the other thing it might have been, which was permission. Permission to go back into the dark, carrying a sound someone had promised to listen for. The sun was low. The wheat stubble caught the light and held it, gold on gold, and the wind moved through it in long, unbroken strokes, sounding like a hand over cloth. Out in the back field, Finn had wandered away from them. He stood near the southeast corner of the property, nose to the ground, and was digging. Not playing, not burying. Digging with the fixed attention of an animal that had found what the earth was keeping. Callan watched him for a moment, then turned back to Jem. They had work to do. The mornings had a rhythm now. Coffee before light, Finn's tags clicking on the kitchen tile, the creak of the screen door and the warm cedar smell of the porch boards releasing yesterday's heat. Then the sound Callan had started listening for without deciding to. Gravel under tires on the county road, slowing at his mailbox, turning in. Jem arrived at 6:15 on a Tuesday, riding the 10-speed that had once been his father's, panniers stuffed with the field notebook, 2 water bottles, and a bag of gas station jerky he called breakfast. He leaned the bike against the fence post and crossed the yard with the unhurried stride of someone who had gotten up before dawn and already made peace with the day's heat. He wore the flannel. He always wore the flannel. Sleeves rolled twice, collar shaped by a neck that wasn't his, the cuffs worn thin at the wrists where his father had rubbed them against fence wire and tractor handles for 20 years before passing the fabric on by dyeing in one. Finn met him at the gate. Not at the porch, at the gate, which was farther than the dog went for anyone else, including Callan. "Mornin', trader," Callan said from the steps. Finn ignored him. He sniffed Jem's hand once, accepted a scratch behind the left ear, and walked beside the boy to the truck as though an itinerary had been agreed upon in advance. They drove the section roads. Jem rode shotgun. Finn lay across the back seat, nose near the open window, cataloging the morning air. Cut stubble, road dust, cattle somewhere to the south. The thin mineral trace of irrigation water running through PVC a quarter-mile off. They checked wells using Callan's system. GPS coordinates logged, depth measured with a weighted line, water quality noted by color and clarity, date and time stamped on every entry. "This one's down 4 feet since last month," Jem said, pulling the line at the Devereaux property. He wrote the number in his notebook, then wrote it again in the margin. Circled. 3 months of data, and the circles were getting tighter, the numbers steeper, the ink pressing harder into the page. "Put the GPS tag on the well cap photo. I want coordinates embedded in the image file, not just your notes." "Why?" "Because a notebook can get lost. A geotagged photo is harder to argue with in front of a judge." Jem looked at him for a beat too long. "You've done this before. Evidence collection." "Not with wells. With bodies." In the Coast Guard, every recovery had a chain of custody. Time, place, condition, who found what, who touched what. You learn to document as if someone will try to take it apart later, because someone always does. Jem wrote something in the margin of his notebook that Callan couldn't see. He suspected it was not a number. They covered 8 properties that morning. At each one, the story repeated itself in the language of numbers. Depths falling, flow rates thinning, the slow subtraction of something the land had always assumed would be there. Heck Morrow joined them at his gate, wearing the same tobacco-stained Carhartt vest he seemed to have been born in, and walked them to 2 neighboring farms whose owners had gone to Wichita for work and left their wells unmonitored. "Both down," Heck said, peering into the second one. He spat into the dust and watched it disappear. "And this one used to be the best water in the county. My wife made bread with it. Said it rose different." "How far down since May?" 6 feet, and it shouldn't drop more than 2 in a dry summer. Not even the dry summers I remember, and I remember the ones that killed cattle." He looked at Jem's notebook, then at Callan. "You boys are building something, aren't you?" "We're documenting. Same thing if it's done right." Heck straightened and looked east, toward where the pump station sat behind its chain link and cameras. "You need to talk to Margaret Devereaux. Her well's closest to the station. She's been saying something's wrong since April, but her husband told her she was imagining it. He's in Wichita now." She wasn't imagining it. They drove to Margaret Devereaux's place, a low ranch house with a vegetable garden gone brown at the edges, despite a sprinkler head turning in slow, half-hearted arcs. The sprinkler made a sound like a clock that had given up on keeping time. Margaret was 70, sharp-eyed, and not interested in being gentle about anything. "My water pressure's dropped 40% since January," she said, standing in her driveway with her arms folded and a straw hat jammed low on her forehead. "I've been calling the water board. They send me to voicemail. The voicemail sends me to God. Mind if we test your well?" "Mind? Son, I've been begging someone to test it for 6 months. My tomatoes are dying. I've had tomatoes in that garden since 1987. They survived drought, hail, and my first husband. They should not be dying because a company nobody voted for decided to suck the ground dry." The measurement confirmed Jem's pattern, down 9 feet from the previous recorded depth. The closest well to the pump station and the fastest drop in the data set. Callan showed Jem how to photograph the wellhead with GPS embedding active, how to seal a water sample in the evidence bag with the date written in permanent marker on the ziplock, how to take a second measurement 20 minutes after the first to check for active draw variation. 2 readings are data. 1 reading is a guess. "You're quoting someone. My instructor at rescue swimmer school. He said it about pulse rates, not wells, but the principle holds. If you can't reproduce the result, it's not a result. It's a hope." Margaret brought them iced tea without being asked, and stood on her porch watching them work with the fierce approval of a woman who had waited 6 months for anyone to take her seriously. "You're the Coast Guard man from Keeler Road." "Yes, ma'am." "And this is the Harkin boy, Della's son." Jem looked up from his notebook. "Yes, ma'am." "Your father was a good man." She adjusted her hat. "Too impatient for his own safety, but good. You've got his hands." Jem looked down at his hands, as if checking. Callan saw him flex his fingers once, a motion so small and private that noticing it felt like an intrusion. They drove north to the Lucero place on the ridge, where the road climbed just enough to see the pump station in the distance. A cluster of industrial shapes that had no business sitting in the middle of farmland. The Lucero family ran cattle and grew alfalfa on 600 acres that had belonged to 3 generations of the same name. The current generation was a couple in their 50s. Annabelle at the barn, Marco at the wellhead, both of them wearing the distilled expression of people who had been doing math in their heads for 6 months and kept arriving at the same answer. "The stock tank's dropping an inch a day," Marco said. He was lean, brown-armed, with the kind of stillness in his body that came from decades of physical work. "I'm hauling water from town in a trailer. That's 120 miles a week to keep 40 head alive." Callan tested the well. Down 7 feet since May. He showed Jem how to take a turbidity sample by filling a clear bottle and holding it against the sky. "See how it's cloudy near the bottom? That means the aquifer layer they're pulling from is compacting. Once an aquifer compacts, it doesn't recover at the same rate. The clay layers seal." "Permanently?" "Some of it, not all. But the difference between some and all matters when your cattle need to drink." Annabelle came down from the barn with water bottles she'd filled from their house line, not the well. She handed them out without comment. The water tasted of chlorine and distance, municipal water, trucked from a treatment plant 40 miles south. The taste of a farm that could no longer drink from its own ground. "Our abuelo dug this well in 1951, Annabelle said, watching Jem write numbers in his notebook. "He said the water was so clean, you could see the bottom of the bucket at 30 feet. She looked toward the pump station on the horizon. "Now, We can't see past 6. Finn had been lying in the shade of the truck, but when Annabelle spoke, he stood and walked to her, pressed his nose against her knuckles once, then returned to the shade. A brief gesture, an acknowledgement from an animal who understood tone better than language. "Smart dog," Annabelle said. "He has his moments." By noon, the heat had become a physical weight across their shoulders. They sat in the truck with the engine running and the air conditioning on, and Finn panting lightly in the back seat, tongue out, eyes half closed. Jem's notebook lay open on his knee. The map they were building. Red circles for tested wells, depths annotated, dates logged. Looked like what it was. The outline of something dying, from the center outward. "Callan, did you always know what to do in the Coast Guard?" Callan looked at the road, straight, flat, disappearing into heat shimmer a mile out. Shimmer that turned the horizon into a false lake, offering water where there was none. "No, I just got better at knowing when I didn't." Jem nodded. He did not ask what that meant. 17 had a way of absorbing answers at its own pace, and Callan was still learning, that teaching meant leaving space for the student to arrive rather than dragging him to the destination. That evening, Callan sat on the workshop step, not the porch, the workshop, where the concrete was cool and the air smelled of motor oil and WD-40 and the faint sweetness of alfalfa from the neighbor's cut field. From here, he could see the church steeple in town, the grain elevator, and between them, miles of flat earth and flat sky, and the sound of wind through wheat stubble too short to hold it. Finn lay near his boots. The dog groaned, shifted, and rested his chin on the concrete beside Callan's right foot. A low, comfortable sound. The sound of an animal who believed the world was stable enough to sleep in. He thought about the numbers. 12 wells, all falling. A pattern that pointed to a single source, pulling from below, with an appetite the permits did not describe. He thought about Jem's notebook, how the boy had filled it with the meticulous obsession of someone who understood that data was the only weapon available to a person nobody was willing to listen to. Out in the backfield, something caught the last light. Finn's head came up. He stared toward the southeast corner of the property, ears forward, nose working. Then he stood and walked toward it, unhurried, purposeful, the gait of a dog with an agenda he did not plan to share. He stopped at a point near the drainage easement and began pawing at the ground. Tentative, then firmer, then with intent. The same spot he'd returned to 3 times in the past week. Callan made a mental note. Then he turned back to the house, because the evening was cooling, and the note would keep until it demanded more than attention. Nolens County. That was what Heck called it when no one official was listening, and Callan was beginning to understand the precision of the name. The calls came on a Thursday, 3 of them, 20 minutes apart, from 3 different farms, all carrying the same message. The bank wanted to talk about their loans. Not a foreclosure notice, not yet, just a conversation, a friendly check-in from a loan officer who used the word restructuring with the practiced gentleness of a dentist reaching for a nerve. Heck called first. His voice had the careful flatness of a man holding something breakable with both hands. They want the land, Callan, not the water, the land. What do you mean? 3 of us, same bank, same week. Heck, Devereaux, and the Lucero family up on the ridge. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. He paused. Nolan's bank, or close enough. I checked the holding company. Same address as Platte Basin's Wichita office. Callan stood in his kitchen, phone against his ear, looking at the map he'd pinned to the wall. Jem's well data plotted in red circles, pump station at the center, the depletion zone spreading outward like a bruise visible only in numbers. He's draining the aquifer on purpose. It's not about water rights. It's about land. Drain the water, fail the farms, buy the acreage cheap, then sell it to developers. Solar leases, wind easements, whatever pays by the acre when the acre can't grow anything anymore. Heck was quiet for a moment, wind on the line. The sound of a man standing in his own kitchen, looking at his own walls and calculating how long they'd stay his. Then, my grandfather built this house in 1942, dug the well by hand. Took him 6 weeks and a back he never fully straightened. I know. I don't think he dug it so a man in clean boots could turn it into a line item. What are we going to do? I'm going to go talk to him. The drive to Platte Basin's pump station took 14 minutes on a county road that turned from gravel to packed earth to a newly graded surface that gleamed with fresh aggregate. The only well-maintained stretch of road in Tillman County. The only surface in the county that didn't crack or crumble or fade. That told Callan everything about whose priorities the budget had absorbed. The station itself was larger than he'd expected. 3 industrial pump housings behind chain link topped with 3 strands of angled wire. A modular office building with 2 satellite dishes on the roof. 4 water tanker trucks parked in a neat row, clean as parade vehicles. And cameras, mounted on the fence posts, on the office corners, on a pole near the gate. More surveillance than a water extraction site in western Kansas had any honest reason to own. In the Coast Guard, that level of camera coverage meant one of 2 things. Something inside was worth protecting, or something inside needed to not be seen. Usually both. The wind carried the sound of the pumps, a low, continuous vibration that traveled through the ground before it reached the ears. Not loud, steady. The sound of something pulling with an appetite that did not sleep. He parked outside the gate. Finn rose in the back seat and stood rigid, body taut, a low sound building in his chest. Not quite a growl, an announcement. The dog had registered the location and declined it. Stay. The dog's eyes said no. His body said he would comply. The distinction was noted and filed by both of them. A security contractor met Callan at the gate. Young, sunburned, a polo shirt with a private company logo and a belt radio clipped at his hip. He held a clipboard he did not consult and recited visitor protocol language with the cheerful vacancy of a man reading from a script he had been given but not asked to understand. Callan let him finish. In the Coast Guard, you let people finish their scripts before telling them why you were actually there. It cost nothing, and it revealed who they reported to. After 4 minutes of language about appointment windows and visitor authorization, Garrett Nolan appeared in the office doorway. He walked to the gate, unhurried. No jacket today, rolled sleeves, a silver watch that caught the sunlight once. His hands were clean, not recently washed, never dirty. The hands of a man whose relationship to the earth was entirely transactional. Up close, Nolan was more composed than Callan had expected. Not stiff, not performing. Genuinely comfortable, which was either natural confidence or its most expensive imitation. His eyes were gray-blue, and they moved with the efficiency of a man who had learned to assess rooms, fences, and people in the same pass. Callan had met men like this in Bahrain. Not military, contractors. The ones who arrived clean and left clean, and understood the region's resources with a precision that had nothing to do with the region's people. "Mr. Ferris, you didn't take the consulting offer." "I didn't. I'm here about the wells." "The wells are permitted, state-approved, quarterly inspected. The wells around your station are dropping at 4 times the regional average. 12 properties. Documented." Nolan's face did not change. The absence of change was its own language. The dialect of a man who had been told worse things by better-funded opponents and had outlasted every one of them. Data from whom? Independent measurement. GPS tagged. Time stamped. 12 locations. By you and the Harkin boy. He said it without inflection, but knowing Jem's name settled into Callan's chest like a cold stone. "Mr. Ferris, this county runs on water. It also runs on property rights. Standing outside my fence, making allegations based on a teenager's science project is not how serious people handle concerns. Serious people don't usually need this many cameras to pump water." Nolan's smile thinned by a degree. The first acknowledgement that the conversation had moved from script to something less controlled. He stepped closer. The gate between them was chain link. Through it, Callan could see the pump housings, the tanker trucks, the graded road. The infrastructure of a lie maintained to industrial standards. "You're a temporary man in a temporary place. Don't make it permanent by being stupid." The security guard shifted his weight. In the truck behind Callan, Finn let out a retreating growl, pulling backward while the sound built, a warning that traveled in reverse. The contractor glanced at the dog, then away, quickly, with the instinct of a man who understood animals better than he understood whatever he'd been hired to guard. "I'm not temporary," Callan said. Nolan studied him. Then he smiled. The smile was the worst thing about him, because it was not cruel. It was patient. It was the smile of a man who had watched other obstacles remove themselves and expected this one to do the same. "Good evening, Mr. Ferris." Callan drove home with the windows down and the taste of dust in his teeth. Finn stood on the back seat, facing backward, watching the road behind them. Every place they had left that he did not trust. On the kitchen table when he got home, a manila folder, no name, no note. It had not been there when he left. He checked the lock. Unlocked. He had not locked it, because nobody in Tillman County locked their doors, and because trust in a small place was a currency he had not yet decided to stop spending. He opened the folder. Inside, a geological survey of Tillman County. Professional. Comprehensive. Stamped. Confidential. Platte Basin Agricultural Holdings across the cover in red ink. Someone had been inside his house. Finn walked to the table, sniffed the folder once, and sat. His tail did not move. His ears were forward, but there was no alarm in him, no hackles, no tension. Familiar scent. Someone the dog knew. Someone who had been here before. Callan looked at the survey, looked at Finn, looked at the front door, still standing open to the evening air. He sat down and read. The survey was 2 years old, and it described a death sentence written in geological time. Callan read it twice under the kitchen light, while the wind pushed against the screen door in long passes, and Finn lay beneath the table with his chin on his paws. The document had been prepared by a hydrogeology firm out of Denver, contracted by Platte Basin Agricultural Holdings. Its conclusions were unambiguous. The Tillman County section of the aquifer was in irreversible decline. Current extraction rates, combined with drought conditions and diminished surface water recharge, projected the water table dropping below recoverable depth within 18 months. The report used the word depletion once at the end, in a sentence that carried the weight of a door being closed. 18 months. And every water rights contract Platte Basin had executed since this survey was completed, every sale, every lease, every handshake deal with farmers who trusted that the water they were buying would exist long enough to use, was built on a foundation the seller knew was collapsing. Not negligence, not overpumping, fraud. Callan set the survey down and pressed both palms flat against the table. He listened to the wind, then to the silence inside it. The space between gusts where the house settled and the dog breathed and the refrigerator hummed, and the world pretended it had not just changed shape beneath him. He went outside. The air was warm and dry and tasted of alkali dust. Stars spread overhead in a density that no photograph had ever properly reproduced, and no city person had ever properly believed. Somewhere, a coyote called once and was not answered. The windmill had stopped. In the still air, the only sound was Callan's boots on dry grass and, ahead of him, the rhythmic scrape of paws in earth. In the back field, near the southeast corner where the property line met the drainage easement, the ground was disturbed. Finn was already there. The dog had gone out through the door sometime during the second reading of the survey, and Callan found him digging. Not randomly, not playfully, not in the bored, circular way dogs dug when heat or anxiety or the scent of a gopher demanded expression. This was systematic, focused. Finn's front paws worked in alternating strokes, sending dirt backward in twin arcs, his breathing fast and purposeful, his nose dropping to the hole between every third or fourth dig, as if checking his progress against a blueprint only he could read. He had been coming to this spot for a week. Now Callan understood why. "What have you got, buddy?" Finn did not stop, did not look up. His nostrils pulsed, rapid, deliberate, the same sampling pattern Callan had seen near the core sample, near Heck's well, near every place where the earth held water's absence like a scar holds the memory of the blade. Callan crouched beside him and felt the ground. The surface was bone dry, cracked, the same parched topsoil as the rest of the 40 acres. But 2 inches down, his fingers found something different. Coolness, a faint dampness, the ghost of moisture trapped by something beneath the grade. A pipe, a seal, something man-made holding something natural. He got a shovel from the workshop, came back. Finn had widened the hole by 6 inches, his chest and muzzle coated in reddish-brown earth, and he was standing over it now with the rigid attention of an animal who had located the thing and was waiting for the slow-moving human to catch up. 30 minutes of digging in the dark. The flashlight balanced on a fence post, throwing a hard white circle onto the earth. Callan's shoulder, the bad one, the rotator cuff that had been repaired twice and would never be repaired enough, began to burn at the 15-minute mark. He shifted the shovel to his left side and kept going. At 18 inches, the blade struck plastic. He cleared the soil by hand after that, scraping with his fingers around a pipe cap. PVC, 4 inches in diameter, sealed with hydraulic cement that had been poured carelessly. Some of it slopped onto the surrounding soil, hardened into a rough collar. This was not a well that had been maintained. It was a well that had been hidden. A monitoring well, the kind utility companies and geological survey firms installed to track water table levels over extended periods. Passive. Quiet. Recording data that no one was supposed to read. Callan broke the cement seal with a cold chisel and a hammer. 3 blows. The cement cracked along its pore lines and fell away in chunks, revealing the dark opening of the pipe. He reached in, and his fingers found a cylinder. Smooth, cylindrical, about 5 inches long. A data logger. Waterproof housing, stainless steel, with a serial number stamped into the casing, and a USB port capped against moisture. He pulled it free, held it under the flashlight, turned it over. Dirt fell from the threads. The serial number prefix, PBA-TLM. The first 3 letters matching Platte Basin Agricultural. The next 3 matching Tillman County. He checked the logger's display window. A small LCD screen behind a scratched plastic cover showed a single readout. REC 26M 04 hint. Recording 26 months, 4-hour intervals, over 4,700 data points, each one a measurement of the water table's depth beneath this exact spot, taken faithfully by a machine that no one had intended anyone to find. Platte Basin's own monitoring device, installed on his property, probably before he'd bought the land, which meant it had been recording through the sale, through his first irrigation season, through the months he'd spent learning what the soil could hold, without knowing what was being taken from beneath it. He looked at Finn. The dog looked back, dirt on his muzzle, pale fur gone brown from chest to belly, amber eyes steady and completely unsurprised. No tail wag, no excitement. Just the calm certainty of an animal who had known the ground was lying and had waited, with the patience dogs had and humans rarely did, for someone to come out with a shovel. Good boy. Good boy. Callan sat in the dirt beside the hole, with the data logger in his hands and the flashlight throwing its circle onto the disturbed earth, and Finn settling beside him, chest against his hip, the dog's warmth against the cool of the night air. 26 months. Every water rights contract signed since then was fraud, documented by the company's own instrument, hidden on land they no longer owned, discovered by a dog who had never been told to look. The wind moved through the wheat stubble and carried with it the smell of dust and distance, and the particular quiet of standing at the edge of what you know and seeing, for the first time, how deep the lie goes. The leak came from where Callan expected it, and from the last person he wanted it to. He drove to Dean Sutter's house at 9 that night. Not the water board office. The house, a mile north of town on a section road lined with cottonwoods whose leaves rattled in the dark with the sound of paper being sorted by a hand that could not decide what to keep. Sutter's farm was modest and old, the kind of place that had been in a family long enough to carry their posture in its framing. A sag in the porch where a chair had always sat. A path worn between the house and the barn that no amount of grass seed would ever fill. A fence line that followed the property boundary with the conviction of something drawn by a man who intended to stay. Sutter was sitting on that porch when Callan pulled up. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been sitting there waiting for exactly this, or something very close to it, for longer than tonight. A glass of something sat untouched on the railing beside him. The barn behind the house was dark, its doors open to the night air, and from inside came the smell of old hay and diesel, and the particular silence of machinery that had stopped being used and started being remembered. I figured you'd come. You left the survey in my house. Sutter rubbed both hands down his face. He was a different man here than he had been in the water board office. Smaller, older, his farmer's tan less like health and more like exposure. The porch light caught the lines in his face and deepened them. I signed things I shouldn't have. Nolan said it was temporary. Seasonal adjustments, he called it. Accelerated extraction to meet contract obligations during the dry cycle. I wanted to believe that. It's easier to believe a lie that lets you keep your salary than a truth that makes you a criminal. Finn sat between them on the porch, equidistant, tail flat against the boards. Callan noticed the dog's ears, one angled toward Sutter, the other toward the road, listening to both the confession and the world outside it. You transferred the geological records to State Archive so nobody could check the survey against the well data. You signed off on quarterly reports you knew were false. 3 farms just got loan calls from a bank Nolan controls. I know what I did. People are losing their water, Dean. Their wells. Their land. Margaret Devereaux is hauling water in buckets to keep a garden alive that her family planted before most of us were born. I know what they're losing. Sutter's voice cracked like a board under too much weight. He looked past the cottonwoods toward the dark field beyond, where his own wheat stood shorter than it should have at this point in the season. I grew up on this place. My family's been here since '42. My grandfather planted those cottonwoods the year my father was born. He stopped, swallowed. My well's in the depletion zone too. He's taking my water the same as everyone else's. He just waited until I'd signed enough paper that I couldn't say so without saying it about myself. Tell me how it started. Sutter looked at his hands. They were farmer's hands, thick-knuckled, scarred across the left thumb where a post-hole digger had caught it 20 years ago. Hands that had dug wells and fixed fences and signed documents that would undo both. 3 years ago, Nolan came to a water board meeting, not the public one, a work session, just me and two staffers. He had a proposal, professional, clean. Said Platte Basin wanted to establish a regional extraction site to serve agricultural contracts across 4 counties. He had permits from the state. He had geological assessments. He had projections showing economic benefit to Tillman County that made our annual budget look like a kid's allowance. And the extraction rates? Within limits. Everything on paper was within limits. I checked. I'm not. He stopped. I was not a careless man. I checked the numbers against the state formula. They worked. He got the permits. When did they stop working? About 14 months in. The quarterly numbers started drifting. Extraction volumes reported to the state didn't match the truck traffic I was seeing on the county road. I asked his operations manager. He said it was seasonal variance and showed me adjusted figures that matched the permits. Sutter rubbed his jaw. Adjusted. That's a word that does a lot of work in this business. And the survey? He commissioned it himself, independent firm out of Denver. I think he expected it to confirm that the aquifer had capacity for expansion. It didn't. Sutter's voice went flat, the flat of a man reading his own indictment from memory. It said the aquifer was in decline, irreversible under current extraction. 18 months to depletion at the monitored rate. He showed it to me in his office, with the door closed. And he said, "Dean, this doesn't leave this room." And you agreed. I agreed. Because by then I had signed 22 months of quarterly certifications that said everything was within limits. Because my signature was on every permit renewal. Because if that survey became public, the first question anyone would ask was, who approved these numbers? And the answer was me. He looked at Callan. He didn't threaten me. He didn't need to. He just showed me how deep I already was and let me do the math. When did you know that it was permanent? The survey. When I read it, I knew. 22 months ago. He picked up the glass, looked at it, set it back without drinking. 22 months of knowing my family's well would go dry because of contracts I helped approve. You know what that does to a man's sleep? I have some idea. Then help me stop him. Sutter looked at Callan for a long time. The cottonwood leaves rattled. A moth circled the porch light in diminishing orbits. Finn shifted on the boards, groaned softly, and rolled onto his side between them, belly exposed, legs slack. A posture of complete vulnerability offered in a moment that held none. The gesture was so misplaced, so absurdly trusting, that it broke something in the air that words had not been able to crack. Sutter looked at the dog. He knows this is the right thing. He knows you smell like someone who feeds him. Sutter almost laughed. Almost. Then the almost collapsed, and what came out was something closer to a cough, or a prayer, or a man deciding to stop drowning by reaching for the nearest solid thing. What do you need from me? Your testimony, dates, names, every document you signed and what you were told when you signed it. The names of every contract Platte Basin executed after the survey was completed. He'll destroy me. He's already destroying the aquifer. Your farm's on it. Your grandfather's cottonwoods are on it. The only question is whether the destruction has your name on it when it's finished, or his. Sutter was quiet for a while. Wind through the cottonwoods. The moth found the light and stayed. One day. Give me 1 day to get the documents together. 1 day. 1 day. He nodded. All right. Jem wanted to go public immediately. Callan said no. The argument happened in the truck, parked at the edge of Callan's property, where the gravel met the county road and the sunflowers in the neighbor's field had turned their backs to the afternoon and faced east, following a light that had already passed them. The engine was off. The windows were down. The heat settled into the cab with the slow certainty of something that had been waiting for them. We have the survey. We have the data logger. We have Sutter. What are we waiting for? Corroboration. A reporter to verify the physical evidence. An independent voice that isn't you, me, or a man who's already implicated. People are losing their farms right now. Heck got another call from the bank yesterday. Margaret Devereaux said she's hauling water from the stock tank in buckets because her well pressure can't push it to the house anymore. She's 70 years old. I know. Then why are we sitting here? Because if we go public with what we have, and Nolan's lawyers find one procedural hole, one chain of custody break, one piece of evidence they can discredit, one date that doesn't match, he doesn't just win the case, he buries the story. And then nobody's grandmother gets her water back, because there won't be a second chance to make it matter. Jem stared through the windshield. The sunflowers stared east, both of them facing something they could not reach. I could get photos, inside the fence, the extraction manifold, the flow gauges. No. If we had photos of the actual operation, you go there again, and they don't let you leave. Callan's voice was harder than he intended. He heard it happen, the shift from firm to sharp, and did not correct it. Because sometimes the line between those things was exactly where a boy needed to hear the truth said. That security contractor already has your name. Nolan has your name. You're 17, and you've already been caught there once. The next time isn't trespass. The next time is the kind of incident that gives his lawyers exactly what they need to make this about a reckless teenager instead of a criminal fraud. And then the story isn't water. The story is you. Jem turned toward him. The boy's jaw was set, and his eyes were bright and furious, and impossibly young. And the flannel hung off his shoulders the way it had hung off his father's. And behind the anger was something that was not anger at all, but its first cousin. Fear. You can't tell me what to do! You're not my dad! The sentence filled the truck and did not leave. It settled into the upholstery and the dust on the dashboard, and the heat and the silence and the space between them. Callan did not answer it. He sat with his hands on the wheel of an engine that was not running, and he let the words be what they were. Not an attack, not rebellion, the wound of a boy whose father had died doing something he could have waited to do, and who had inherited from that death a terror of waiting that looked exactly like courage, and sometimes was not. And 17 years old was too young to tell the difference. Behind the boy's words, another room opened. Not this truck. A dock. Kodiak, Alaska, February. The harbor wind cutting through every layer of clothing, as if fabric were merely a polite suggestion. The Coast Guard crew walking toward the pier in their orange flight suits, 4 of them, and a man standing at the end of the dock, watching them approach and counting the bodies in the group. Keegan Moss's father. He was taller than Callan remembered, or maybe grief had straightened him. He stood with his hands at his sides, and he watched the crew walk closer, and he did not ask the question, because the answer was already in the number. 4 crew. No one else. And the silence that came out of him when he understood was louder than any sound Callan had heard before or since. The silence of a father who had said yes when his son asked to go sailing, because 19-year-olds asked for things and the weather had looked fine, and saying yes was what fathers did, until the ocean decided that what fathers did was not enough. No. Callan's voice came out lower than he expected. I'm not your dad, but I'm asking you to wait. Jem looked out the window. His hand dropped from the place where the whistle lay beneath his shirt. His jaw worked once. Twice. The anger left his shoulders. Not gone, just relocated. Pushed down into whatever place 17-year-olds stored the things they did not yet know how to carry. How long? Until the reporter confirms the evidence. 1 week. Maybe less. And if he moves first? If Nolan finds out about Sutter before then we adapt. But we don't hand him a weapon by being careless. Jem opened the truck door and got out. He walked to the tailgate and sat on it, legs hanging, face toward a sun that had no comfort to offer, and offered it anyway. Finn followed him out through the open door and lay between the boy's boots on the gravel. Then the dog rolled onto his back, belly up, legs slack, mouth open in a loose, unguarded pant. A posture of absolute trust, given to a boy who needed to see that trust was still a thing the world could hold. Jem's hand came to rest on the dog's chest. His fingers moved in the fur. He did not speak. Neither did Callan. The wind smelled of cut wheat and distance, and the light made long gold shapes on the gravel that stretched toward the east, toward the pump station, toward everything that waited to be resolved. Nolan found out on a Friday. Callan knew because Sutter called at 6 in the morning, voice running fast and thin, the sound of a man whose rehearsed calm had failed before the first sentence. He knows. Something I said at the office. I contradicted myself on a date, and his operations manager was in the room, and I saw his face change. He knows it was me. Where are you? Home. My place. Stay there. Don't go to the office. Don't answer Nolan's calls. Don't talk to anyone from Platte Basin. What if he... I'll handle it. Stay home. Callan moved, not panicked, not slow, The calibrated urgency of a man who had spent 2 decades responding to emergencies by ordering them into steps. Assess, plan, execute. He had learned this sequence in a helicopter over the Bering Sea, and it had saved more people than he could remember, and failed to save the one he couldn't forget. And now, it was the only mode he had that did not include fear. First, secure the evidence. He copied the data logger files to a thumb drive, checking each file transfer against the original to confirm nothing had corrupted. He photographed every page of Sutter's statement, 31 pages of dates, signatures, meeting notes, the careful handwriting of a man who had kept records of his own corruption, as though he had always known this day would come and had been too afraid to bring it himself. He sealed the thumb drive in a waterproof evidence bag, wrote the date on it in permanent marker, and addressed a priority overnight envelope to Claire Obrecht's newsroom at the Capital Journal. Then the digital copies. He uploaded the images to a cloud account the reporter could access with a password he had given her by phone 2 days earlier. He sent an email. Nolan knows about the leak. Security presence at my property. Accelerate your timeline if possible. Everything's documented and distributed across 3 locations. If anything happens to any one copy, the others will surface. He read the email once. It sounded like a contingency plan. It sounded like a man who had done this before, which he had not in civilian life. In the Coast Guard, the contingency plans were built into the mission briefs. In Kansas, he was building them as he went. Then he took the data logger itself, the physical device Finn had pulled from the earth, still carrying soil in its threads, the serial number that linked Platte Basin to 26 months of knowing and not telling. Wrapped it in a clean shop towel and drove it to Heck Morrow's farm. Heck met him at the barn door without a word, took the device, locked it in the gun safe behind the feed bins. The safe was old, heavy, bolted to concrete, and had survived 2 attempted burglaries over 30 years. Don't tell anyone it's here. Son, I've kept 3 marriages worth of secrets. A plastic tube ain't going to break my streak. 3 marriages? 2 divorces and a death. The death was easiest. She was a saint and knew it. Go. Do what you need to do. Callan drove back to the farm and emailed Claire Obrecht. Nolan knows about the leak. Security presence at my property. Accelerate your timeline if possible. Everything's documented and distributed. He photographed the county road through his kitchen window. Timestamp, save. By noon, a dark SUV with tinted windows was parked on the county road outside his property, not in his driveway. Not close enough to constitute a threat in any language the sheriff would recognize. Just outside, sitting on the shoulder with the engine running, present, final, waiting to be read. Finn stood at the living room window, body rigid, right ear forward, left ear swiveled toward Callan. His tail had dropped to its lowest position, the tip curled slightly inward. Not fear, assessment. The dog was measuring the threat against the distance and deciding whether to guard the window or the door. He chose both. He circled from the back door to the front, then to the window, then back. A perimeter check performed indoors. The instinct of a Coast Guard patrol dog compressed into a 1,200 square foot farmhouse. 3 circuits. Then he planted himself at the front door and did not move. Easy. Finn looked at him. The look said, no. Jem called at 3. There's a truck outside our house, too. Don't go outside. Tell your mom. She already called the sheriff. He said he'd send someone to check. Nobody's come. Stay inside, Jem. The boy's breathing was audible through the phone. Fast. Controlled, but fast. I want to. I know what you want. Stay inside. Callan. The boy's voice was different now. Younger. The flannel and the notebook and the 3 months of data version of Jem had stepped aside, and what was left was 17. Just 17. With a dead father and a stranger parked outside, and a borrowed whistle under his shirt, and no one coming. Is this the part where it gets bad? This is the part where we find out whether we documented well enough. I think we did. Okay. A breath. Okay. The afternoon passed in the particular tension of waiting. Not idle waiting, but the loaded kind. The kind that felt like holding a breath you'd started too early and could not release without losing something. Callan cleaned the kitchen, organized tools in the workshop, checked his phone every 4 minutes. Finn followed him, room to room, shadow close, nails clicking on every surface. 70 pounds of certainty that proximity was the only strategy worth pursuing. The SUV left at 5:30. Its departure did not feel like relief. It felt like a period at the end of a sentence that had more to say. The light changed. The kitchen went from bright to amber, to a dull gold that meant the sun was low, and the evening was beginning its slow negotiation with the dark. Callan stood at the sink and washed a glass he had already washed, because his hands needed occupation, and the glass was there. Outside, the windmill had started turning again, a soft, rhythmic creak that measured the evening in increments of wind. Finn lay in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, positioned so he could see both the front door and Callan. His chin was on his paws, his eyes were open. He had not slept since the SUV arrived, and would not sleep until the house decided it was safe, which was a decision only the dog was qualified to make. At 6:47, Della called. Jem didn't come home from school. The world narrowed. Not slowly, not by degrees. It narrowed the way water closes over a head. Total, immediate, and cold. When was he last seen? He left on his bike at 3:15. Amy Goss saw him on Route 8 heading east. That's the direction of... Her voice broke. Not a sob, a fracture. The sound of a structure that had been carrying too much for too long, failing at the thinnest point. His bike was found at the county road turnoff, near the pump station. 2 signals. 1 choice. I'm coming. He grabbed his jacket, his phone, a flashlight. Finn was already at the door, standing in sortie posture, weight forward, ears locked, the total stillness that preceded total motion. Callan drove faster than the road wanted. The sun had dropped into the last red band above the western horizon, and the land had gone from gold to copper to something darker, the color of a wound that had not yet decided whether to close. Fence post shadows stretched long across the gravel, all of them pointing east. At the county road turnoff, Della's truck was already there, parked at an angle that spoke of arrival rather than parking. She stood beside the bicycle, Roe Harkin's old 10-speed, laid on the shoulder, one pedal still turning slowly in the wind. His phone's off. Her face was white beneath the sunburn. It goes straight to voicemail.
How long? Since 3:15.
That's... She checked her watch, and the motion was so much like Callan's own watch-checking reflex that it landed in his chest before he could deflect it. Over 3 hours. 3 hours. In the Coast Guard, 3 hours in cold water was the line between survivable and statistical. In Kansas heat, 3 hours was different. Dehydration, disorientation, the slow stupidity that came from spending too long in sun without water. But it wasn't the heat that worried him. It was the compound, the contractor, the chain link, the man in clean boots who had told Callan he was temporary. Della stood beside the bike with her arms wrapped around her own ribs, holding herself together with a grip that looked borrowed from every hard thing she had ever done alone. 2 years of single parenting a stubborn boy on a drying farm in a county that had stopped returning phone calls. 2 years of being Jem's mother and father and banker and mechanic and the person who sat up at night listening for the sound of a 10-speed coming up the gravel drive. I should have, she started. Don't. Not now. Callan stood. Whatever you think you should have done, you did something harder. You raised a boy who cares enough about his neighbor's water to get hurt for it. Della looked at him. The look held 2 years of carried weight and the first unsteady tremor of setting some of it down. Find my son. Yes, ma'am. Callan crouched beside the bike. Finn was already working, nose to the ground, quick circles, focused and purposeful, following a scent trail through dust and gravel and the fading warmth of a Kansas evening. Not rigid, not assessing, moving, tracking. Then Callan saw it. In the dust beside the rear tire, half buried in roadside grit, the braided lanyard lay in a loose coil. The snap hook was open. The clasp had not been unlatched. It had been torn, broken. And at the end of the lanyard, catching the last copper light of the day, the steel rescue whistle lay on its side in the dirt. He picked it up. The metal was still warm, warm from the boy's body, from the place against his sternum where it had rested for days now, where Callan had told him to keep it, close enough to reach with one hand in the water. He'd given the kid a whistle and called it preparation. He'd told himself it was readiness, equipping a junior before open water the way a senior swimmer did. Standing over it now, lanyard broken, steel holding the last light of the day, he understood what it had actually been. Permission. Permission to go back into the dark, carrying a sound he never got to make. Della? His voice was steady. Steady because it had to be, because 18 years of Coast Guard rescue operations had taught him that calm was not the absence of fear, but its most useful container. Stay here. Call the sheriff again. If he doesn't answer, call the state police. And call Claire Obrecht at the Capitol Journal. Her number's in my phone, top of recent calls. Tell her it's happening now. What are you going to? I'm going to find him. That's what I did for 18 years. He put the whistle in his jacket pocket, felt its weight against his ribs on the left side, where he'd carried it for 11 years in helicopters and on cutters, and once in a pocket during a funeral he did not talk about. Finn had not waited for instruction. The dog was already 40 yards ahead, nose low, moving east along the road shoulder in the zigzag pattern of an active track. Scent trail of a boy who had ridden his bike to this point and then continued on foot into the falling dark toward the orange security lights of a place that had no honest reason to glow. Callan followed. The sun dropped below the horizon. The sky went the color of deep water, and somewhere ahead, past the fence line and the cameras and the graded road that was the best maintained lie in Tillman County, a boy with no whistle was waiting for someone to come. Kansas dark was absolute. Not the dark of a city, where light bled upward from every surface and the sky never fully committed. Not the dark of a coast, where the ocean reflected whatever the moon offered. This was plains dark, the kind that started at the ground and went up forever, broken only by stars that looked close enough to cut yourself on, and a horizon so flat you could feel the curve of the earth beneath your feet if you stood still long enough. Callan did not stand still. He moved east along the road shoulder, with Finn 40 yards ahead, the dog's pale coat catching starlight in brief silver flashes between the tall grass. The scent trail ran straight from the bike toward the pump station, and Finn followed it with the locked-in focus of an animal operating on instinct older than command. Nose down, body low, each stride measured and purposeful, the zigzag pattern tightening as the trail freshened. The wind had shifted, from the south now, carrying heat and the smell of dry grass and diesel exhaust, faint and industrial. The pump station. In the Coast Guard, night operations followed protocol. Compass bearing, wind direction for drift calculation, radio check every 4 minutes. In Kansas, the protocol was simpler. Follow the dog, read the wind, and trust the skills that 18 years of open water darkness had burned into muscle and bone. He could navigate by star position. He could estimate distance by counting strides. He could read terrain changes through his boot soles, gravel to earth to aggregate. Each change told him how close he was to Nolan's maintained road. Finn stopped. Not gradually. The dog planted his front paws, and his whole body went rigid at a fence line, chain link catching starlight in a grid of dull silver. He turned his head once toward Callan, amber eyes holding the security light, then looked back through the fence toward the compound beyond. Search. The command was CG, one of the few English-language commands Finn still answered without hesitation, a holdover from his patrol days at Air Station Cape Cod. The dog moved along the fence line, nose working the base where chain link met earth, until he found it. A gap where the bottom rail had been bent upward, probably by a deer, probably months ago, and never repaired because nobody expected a 70-pound German shepherd with a purpose to come through it at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Finn went under. Callan followed, the chain link scraping his back through his jacket, dirt under his palms, his bad shoulder protesting the crawl, with a heat that radiated from the rotator cuff to the base of his neck. He came up on the other side in a crouch, breathing controlled, scanning. The cameras. He'd noted their positions during his daytime visit. 4 visible, mounted on poles and building corners, sweeping arcs that left predictable gaps. CG base security training. Every camera system had blind spots. The question was whether you could find them faster than the system could find you. He moved between the pump housings, staying in the shadow corridors where the security lights didn't reach. Finn tracked ahead, nose down, following Jem's scent through the compound, with the certainty of an animal who had already located the endpoint and was leading Callan there by the shortest route. The trailer sat at the back of the compound, near the secondary access gate. A portable office, aluminum siding, a single window lit from inside, with the flat fluorescent quality of a room that existed only for waiting. A security contractor's white pickup was parked beside it, engine off, windows up. Finn sat at the trailer's steps, looked up at Callan. Then placed himself between the door and the parking area, body squared to the compound, and did not move. Guarding the exit before anyone inside knew they needed one. Callan climbed the steps, knocked once, hard. The sound carried across the compound and came back from the pump housings, smaller, as if the machinery had heard it and decided not to respond. The door opened. The security contractor, the same young man from the gate, sunburned, polo shirt with the company logo starting to peel at the shoulder, belt radio turned low, stood in the doorway with an expression that was trying to be authority and arriving somewhere closer to recognition that authority had left the building several hours ago. Behind him, sitting in a plastic chair beside a folding desk with nothing on it except a water bottle and a two-way radio, was Jem. Uninjured, scared. His hands were in his lap, not restrained, just folded in the particular way of a person who had been told to sit and had been sitting long enough for the instruction to become its own kind of confinement. His eyes were wide, and his jaw was set, and the flannel was torn at the collar where someone had grabbed it. But he was whole. He was breathing. He was alive. The relief hit Callan in the place between his sternum and his spine. The place where rescuers stored the outcomes they couldn't afford to feel until the operation was over. He set it aside. Later. Later for all of it. "I'm here to take the boy home." The contractor's hand went to his radio. "He was trespassing. I'm holding him for the sheriff." "The sheriff hasn't come. You've been holding a minor in a locked room without parental notification for..." Callan checked his watch, a reflex so automatic he didn't register the motion, the way he'd checked mission clocks 1,000 times in 1,000 helicopters. "Over 3 hours. That's not security. That's unlawful detention of a minor. And you don't have the authority for it." "Mr. Nolan said to hold anyone who..." "Mr. Nolan is not a law enforcement officer. He's not a judge. He's not the boy's parent. And his instructions to you are going to look very different on a witness stand than they sound in this trailer." The contractor was maybe 30, young enough to have taken this job for the paycheck, and old enough to understand that paychecks sometimes bought more trouble than they covered. His eyes moved from Callan to Jem to the radio to the door where Finn's shadow was visible against the security light. He was climbing the fence. He had a phone. He was taking pictures of the manifold array. What was I supposed to do? Call his mother. Call the sheriff. Let him go. Callan kept his voice level. The CG command voice, the one that had talked panicked swimmers into rescue baskets in 30-foot seas, the one that worked not because it was loud, but because it left no room for the listener to do anything except what it asked. Any of those, in any order. What you weren't supposed to do is lock a 17-year-old in a room and wait for instructions from the man who's paying you to do something a jury will call kidnapping. The word hung. The contractor looked at the floor, then at Jem, then at Callan. His hand came off the radio. Take him. Jem stood up. His legs were stiff. 3 hours in a plastic chair in a room with no airflow and one window, and the particular claustrophobia of being held by someone who had not told him why or for how long. His jaw was set in that way Callan knew now, the configuration that meant he was holding something together by refusing to acknowledge it was coming apart. He walked to the door. Callan put a hand on his shoulder, brief, firm, the grip of a man who had pulled hundreds of people from water and knew exactly how much pressure steadied and how much restrained. You're all right. I know. But his voice was smaller than his words, and his hand went to the place under his shirt where the whistle should have been, and was not. And Callan saw the gesture and felt it in the pocket of his own jacket, where the steel sat warm and useless, and full of all the things he had meant by giving it, and all the things it had failed to be. They stepped outside. The night air hit them, warm, diesel-tinged, somehow cleaner than the air inside the trailer had been, which said more about the trailer than the air. Finn was at the base of the steps, standing between them and the compound, 70 pounds of certainty that the exit mattered more than the entrance. Callan moved Jem to the truck, sat him on the tailgate, checked his eyes, his hands, the color in his fingernails. CG assessment, automatic. No hypothermia, no shock. Dehydration, moderate. Fear, controlled but present, sitting in the boy's shoulders and the set of his jaw, and the way he kept his hands flat on his thighs, as if testing that his body was still his. What happened? Jem spoke in pieces. He had left school at 3:15, rode his bike east because he had seen the SUV leave Callan's farm and thought the coast was clear. Wanted photos of the extraction manifold. Got through the fence at the same gap Callan had later found. Got inside the compound. Got the camera out. Started shooting. I got 6 photos, the manifold gauges, the flow meters, 3 of them showing extraction rates 3 times the permitted maximum. Then the contractor found me. Did he touch you? Grabbed my collar. That's how it tore. He looked down at the flannel, his father's flannel, stitched by his mother, torn by a man whose name he didn't know. Took my phone, put me in the trailer, said the sheriff was coming. Sheriff didn't come. The photos? Still on my phone. He put it in the desk drawer. He didn't delete them. Did he know what you were photographing? I don't think so. He just saw a kid with a phone. He gave me a water bottle after the first hour, told me to sit tight. He wasn't mean. He was just following orders he didn't understand. Callan looked at the boy, 17, torn collar, 6 photos on a confiscated phone that might contain the visual evidence they needed. Scared and exhausted, and still thinking about whether the man who had held him was following orders. You did good. I went back when you told me not to. Yeah, you did that too. Finn climbed onto the tailgate and lay beside Jem, close enough for the boy to feel the dog's warmth through the flannel. Jem's hand found the fur at Finn's neck and stayed there. Neither of them moved. Then headlights. 2 sets coming up the access road. The first was a pickup Callan didn't recognize. The second was a sedan, older, dusty, with a press credential hanging from the rearview mirror. Garrett Nolan stepped out of the pickup. Behind him, from the sedan, a woman Callan had spoken to only by phone and email. Claire Obrecht, Capital Journal, Environmental Beat, carrying a recorder in one hand and a camera in the other. She moved across the gravel with the unhurried certainty of a woman who had arrived at stories before and knew that the story would wait for her because it had nowhere else to go. And behind both of them, turning off the county road with lights flashing in lazy, unhurried arcs, the sheriff's cruiser. Della had made the calls, all of them. Sheriff, state police, reporter. And then she had driven to the county road turnoff and waited, because that was what mothers did when their sons were missing and the system had failed, and the only thing left was to stand at the edge of the dark and make sure every road that led toward the boy had someone on it. The confrontation happened in the orange light of the pump station's security floods, with the wind picking up from the south and the first distant roll of thunder audible beyond the horizon. A low, sustained sound, like something being moved across the floor of the sky. Nolan was calm. That was the first thing Callan noticed, and the last thing that surprised him. The man stood beside his pickup with his arms folded and his expression set to the same patient, assessing default it had carried in the diner, in the phone call, in every interaction. The expression of a man who believed composure was a weapon, and he was the best armed person in any room. This is private property. All of you are trespassing. The sheriff, a broad man named Cartland, who wore his badge the way some men wore their wedding rings, with the exhausted duty of someone who had forgotten why they'd put it on, but couldn't imagine taking it off, looked at Callan, then at Jem, then at the trailer, then at the security contractor, who was now standing apart from everyone else, with the posture of a man trying to determine which direction offered the least exposure. Mr. Nolan, I've got a call from Mrs. Harkin saying her minor son was detained on this property without parental notification. That's a complaint I have to respond to. The boy was trespassing. My security team held him for law enforcement, which, respectfully, is you, for 3 hours, without a phone call, without a guardian notified. Nolan's jaw tightened a fraction. The first crack in the surface, hairline thin, visible only if you were looking for it. Callan was looking. Claire Obrecht stepped forward. She was smaller than Callan had imagined from their phone calls. Mid-40s, practical boots, a windbreaker with a notebook pocket sewn into the lining. The kind of journalist who had stopped trying to look the part and had instead become it. She didn't introduce herself to Nolan. She didn't need to. The recorder was already running, its red light visible against the dark. Mr. Nolan, I'm Claire Obrecht with the Capital Journal. I've reviewed documents suggesting Platte Basin Agricultural Holdings was aware of irreversible aquifer depletion in Tillman County at least 26 months ago and continued to execute water rights contracts after that date. Would you like to comment? Thunder rolled closer. Lightning forked across the western sky, white, branching, held for 2 full seconds before the dark took it back. The wind had picked up enough to move the chain-link gate on its hinges, a metallic rattle that sounded like something being counted. That's speculation, unverified. Based on what? A buried pipe and a scared teenager? A data logger with your company's serial number, Callan said. He stepped forward, not threatening, close enough to be heard over the wind without raising his voice. Recording water table depth at 4-hour intervals for 26 months. Installed on property your company no longer owns. Monitoring a decline your own geological survey confirmed. The survey you stamped confidential and had your water board chair transfer to state archive to prevent cross-referencing. And Dean Sutter has provided a full, signed statement detailing every document he was directed to falsify, every quarterly report he was told to approve, and every contract your company executed after the date of that survey. Lightning again, closer. The thunder came 3 seconds later, a sound that traveled through the ground before it reached the ears. Finn shook himself once, an involuntary motion, the response to atmospheric pressure dropping faster than any animal wanted, and resettled between Callan and Jem, weight forward, facing Nolan. Nolan's composure held. His eyes moved. Contractor, sheriff, recorder, camera, Callan, Jem, the dog. Calculating, measuring, looking for the gap in the fence his lawyers could use. He did not find it. I'll need to consult with my legal team before making any statement. That's your right, Claire said, already writing in the notebook with the efficiency of a woman who had heard that sentence from better-dressed people in larger buildings and had not been impressed then either. I'll note that in the piece. Sheriff, Callan said, this boy needs to go home. Cartland looked at Nolan, looked at the trailer where a 17-year-old had been held for 3 hours, looked at the reporter and her recorder, and the camera that had already documented the compound, the trailer, and every face present. He made a calculation of his own, and for once, it came down on the side that did not require a budget meeting. Mr. Nolan, I'd appreciate it if your security team made themselves available for a statement tomorrow morning at my office. 8 o'clock. It was not an arrest. It was not justice. It was the first sentence of a paragraph that would take months to write and might never be read aloud in a courtroom. But it was the sound of a door opening. And in Tillman County, where doors had been closing for 26 months, the sound carried. Rain started. Fat drops, warm, hitting the gravel with a sound like applause that didn't know when to stop. Finn shook himself once. Ears, shoulders, haunches, tail. A full-body reset that sent water in every direction and broke the tension more effectively than any speech could have. Jem almost smiled. Callan put him in the truck. Della was waiting at the county road turnoff, standing beside her pickup in the rain, and when she saw the headlights, she moved toward them, and Jem got out, and she held him without speaking. The rain soaked both of them, and neither of them cared. And Callan sat in his truck with the engine running and Finn in the back seat, and watched them hold each other in the headlights, and did not get out, because some moments did not need a third person, even one who had earned the right to be there. After a while, Della looked up. Through the rain and the windshield and the distance between their trucks, her eyes found his. She mouthed 2 words. He couldn't be sure, but he thought they were, "Thank you." He nodded once, put the truck in gear, drove home with the rain hammering the roof, and Finn's chin on the center console, and the whistle in his jacket pocket, and the weight of everything that had happened settling into his shoulders alongside everything that hadn't happened. The boy in the water, the boy in the trailer. The distance between those two outcomes measured not in miles, but in whether someone was willing to go. The story broke 3 days later. Claire Obrecht's piece ran above the fold in the Capital Journal's Sunday edition, with a photograph of the pump station taken from the county road and a headline that used the word fraud without flinching. By Monday, 2 other counties with Platte Basin contracts had opened inquiries. By Wednesday, the State Attorney General's office had requested the company's extraction permits, geological reports, and financial records going back 4 years. By Friday, Platte Basin's corporate office in Wichita had issued a statement. 3 paragraphs of language so carefully emptied of meaning that reading it was like eating food with no flavor and being told it was nutrition. Garrett Nolan was not arrested. Not immediately. Lawyers were involved. 3 firms, 2 jurisdictions, a tangle of corporate structure designed to absorb liability the way a sponge absorbs water, spreading it so thin across so many surfaces that no single point appeared wet enough to prosecute. Callan understood this. He had served in a branch of the military where the gap between "we know" and "we act" was measured in budgets and protocols and the particular inertia of systems that preferred not to be embarrassed. But the dominoes had been tipped, and dominoes did not require permission to keep falling. Dean Sutter cooperated fully with the state investigation. He resigned from the water board on a Tuesday morning, walked out of the beige building without taking anything from his desk except a photograph of his father standing beside the well in 42, and drove home. Callan heard from Heck that Sutter had started repairing his own well, hand-digging the shaft deeper, working alone in the heat, which was either penance or stubbornness, or the only kind of prayer a man like that knew how to perform with his hands. The aquifer damage was real. That was the part no headline would fix and no lawyer could reverse. 18 months to recoverable depletion, maybe longer now that Platte Basin's pumps had been shut down by court order. Maybe not. The geology was patient and indifferent. The water table would recover on its own schedule, which was measured in decades and did not answer to elections or editorials or the urgency of people who needed to drink. Heck Morrow stood at the community meeting held in the church on a Thursday evening and said what everyone already knew. We saved the town, lost the water. Nobody argued. Nobody needed to. The meeting was not triumphant. Harlan Crossing did not do triumph. Triumph required energy the town had spent on survival, and what remained was something quieter and more durable. A room full of people sitting in pews and folding chairs, drinking coffee from styrofoam cups, listening to county officials explain mitigation options and grant programs and sustainable yield projections, and understanding that the words meant, "This is what's left. You'll have to make it work." But you're not making it alone. Callan sat in the back pew with Finn at his feet. He did not speak. Not because he had nothing to say, but because this was not his meeting. It belonged to the people who had been here before him and would be here after. The ones whose wells carried their family names, whose fences followed property lines drawn by grandparents who had driven stakes into this earth and meant it. He had come into the church, sat down. That was all. The first time he had been inside this building since moving to Kansas. Though he had passed it on the county road dozens of times, and once, in the back of his truck, with Jem's notebook on his lap, had looked at its open door and kept driving. Tonight, he had not kept driving. The light through the windows was amber. The wooden pews smelled of lemon oil and decades. The voices of the people around him rose and fell with the cadence of a community deciding, together, what to do next. He was not sure what he believed about the building. He was sure about the people in it. Margaret Devereaux spoke. She stood in the second pew with the straw hat in her hands and the voice of a woman who had spent 70 years learning how to say things that mattered without asking permission first. I've been calling the water board since April. I've been told it was seasonal. I've been told it was my pump. I've been told to be patient. She looked around the room. My tomatoes are dead. My well pressure won't push water to the house. And the man who told me to be patient was cashing checks from the company that was killing my well. I am done being patient, but I am not done being here. A murmur went through the room. Not applause, something more useful. People recognizing their own experience in someone else's voice. Heck spoke again. He talked about the conservation plan and what it would cost and what it would save and the difference between those two numbers, which was not zero and was not insurmountable, and was, he said, roughly the same as the price of pretending nothing had changed. Dean Sutter arrived late. He came in through the side door and sat in the last pew on the far side, as distant from the front as architecture allowed. His face held the pallor of a man who had walked into a room where everyone knew what he had done, and no one had yet decided what to do about it. Callan watched him. Finn, lying at Callan's feet, lifted his head once, registered Sutter's scent, and put his head back down. No one spoke to Sutter. No one asked him to leave. The community had not yet decided whether he was a villain or a witness or something in between. And in Harlan Crossing, that decision would be made over months, not minutes, through actions rather than declarations, in the accumulated evidence of whether a man who had done wrong would do the work of making it right. A young farmer named Lucero asked about well-depth assistance programs. The county extension agent, a woman with dirt under her nails and numbers in her head, laid out a conservation plan that would require every irrigated farm in the county to reduce water use by 30% over 3 years. Nobody cheered. Several people nodded. One man in the back said, 30%'s better than zero. And that was as close to consensus as the room would get. Jem sat 2 rows ahead of Callan, the side Della. The boy had not spoken during the meeting. He had listened with his notebook open on his knee, not writing, just holding it, as a person holds a tool they have carried long enough for it to become part of their hand. At one point during the extension agent's presentation, when a slide showed the depletion map with its red circles, Jem had looked back at Callan. Not for approval, not for reassurance, just to share the weight of seeing something he had known for months finally visible on a wall where other people could see it too. Callan had nodded once. Jem had turned back around. Afterward, the church emptied slowly. People stood in the gravel parking lot and talked in the unhurried way Kansas people talked when the day's work was done and the evening was still deciding what to become. The storm had passed 2 days ago, and the sky was clear, and the stars were out in their full, unreasonable density. Heck found Callan by the truck. The older man looked at him for a long moment, the way he looked at fences, checking for weak points, measuring what would hold. "You didn't save the water." "No. You saved us from not knowing." He adjusted his cap. "That's different. And it's enough of a start." "Start?" "I said start, not finish." Heck looked at Finn, who was sitting in the truck bed with his ears up and his nose working the evening air. "Dog's earned a steak." "He thinks everything earns him a steak. Smart animal." Heck walked away, then turned back. "You staying?" "Yeah." "Good." He nodded once. "We'll need someone who knows water." 2 weeks. The light changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. September in Kansas arrived through the back door, lowering the afternoon heat by a few degrees, shifting the quality of the mornings from white to gold, pulling the shadows longer across the fields. The wheat was gone, harvested or failed, and the stubble stood in neat rows that caught the light and held it close to the ground. Callan adjusted his irrigation schedule. Less water, smarter distribution. He recalibrated 2 of the pivot sprinkler heads and replaced a section of buried PVC that had been losing pressure since June. The work was quiet, specific, useful. Labor that let a man think without requiring him to reach a conclusion. Jem came by on a Saturday, not sneaking, not defiant. He parked Della's truck in the driveway, parked it properly, the way his father must have taught him, straight between the fence posts with the bed facing out for easy loading. He walked to the workshop where Callan was rebuilding a solenoid valve, Finn lying in the open doorway with his chin on his paws and one eye tracking the boy's approach. The bruise was gone. The torn flannel had been repaired. Someone, probably Della, had stitched the collar with thread that almost matched, but not quite. A mend visible if you looked, and invisible if you didn't, which served as a metaphor for most of what had happened in Tillman County that summer. Jem carried a folder under one arm and the field notebook in his back pocket, and an expression Callan recognized as the face a person made when they were about to say something they had been practicing in a mirror. "I'm applying for the environmental science program at K-State." "Good. The county extension agent wrote me a recommendation. Margaret Devereaux wrote one too. She said I was..." He checked a paper in the folder, squinting at the handwriting. "The most stubborn person she'd encountered since her first husband, and twice as useful." Callan set down the solenoid, wiped his hands on the shop rag that lived on his left shoulder. "That sounds right. I want to come back after, not just summers, not just visits. Come back and build a long-term monitoring program for the county. Map the aquifer recovery. Build a data set that nobody can bury or transfer or stamp confidential." "That'll take years." "I know. 10, maybe more." He said it without flinching. 10 years was not a threat to a 17-year-old. It was a country he hadn't visited yet and wanted to. "Your dad would be proud of you." Jem looked at the ground, then at Finn, then at the workshop walls with their pegboard of tools hung in order, and the calendar from the farm supply store, and the window that looked out onto fields that would need decades of careful management before they recovered what had been taken from beneath them. All the ordinary things that had become, over one Kansas summer, the architecture of something that mattered. I brought this back. He reached into his shirt and pulled the whistle free. The lanyard had been repaired, new cord, braided tight, knotted at the clasp with the neat precision of someone who had watched a YouTube video on rope work and practiced until the knot would hold in open water. The steel was scratched and warm and still carried the letters USCG on its back. He held it out. Keep it. It's yours. It was mine. Now it's a tool that belongs to someone who's going to need it. Next summer, when you're testing every well in the county, you'll want something that carries farther than a voice. Jem closed his hand around the whistle, held it against his chest. Then he slipped the lanyard over his head and tucked it back under his shirt, where it rested against his sternum, in the place where a boy carried things he was learning to name. Thank you. For this. For... He stopped, started again. For coming to get me. You earned it. All of it. Finn stood up from the doorway and walked to Jem. He pushed his nose into the boy's palm once, a brief, efficient gesture of recognition, then turned and walked back to Callan, then turned again and stood between them, equidistant, ears forward, amber eyes moving from one face to the other with the calm appraisal of a dog who had chosen both of them and did not intend to be asked to choose between them. He's going to miss you, Callan said. He'll manage. He's got better posture than most people. Almost a smile. Almost. Della's truck pulled into the driveway an hour later. She brought cornbread in a cast-iron skillet wrapped in a towel, and a jar of peach preserves and a six-pack of root beer that Jem rolled his eyes at and drank two of. They sat at Callan's kitchen table, the same table where a core sample had lain on a hot August night, where a manila folder had appeared while no one was home, where a data logger had been examined under a lamp that buzzed. And they ate cornbread with preserves and drank root beer, and talked about the conservation plan and K-State's application deadlines, and whether Heck's well would recover first or last. Finn lay under the table, patient, positioned between three pairs of feet. At one point, a piece of cornbread fell from Jem's hand. It did not reach the floor. The dog caught it mid-drop with the reflexes of an animal who had been waiting for this exact event since the first plate was set down. He planned that, Della said. He plans everything. Della looked at Callan across the table. The suspicion she'd carried the first morning was gone. In its place was something more complicated. Gratitude, certainly, but also the wary recognition of a woman who had been handling everything alone for 2 years and was not yet sure what it meant to have someone nearby who could help without being asked and leave without being pushed. Thank you, she said, for what you did for my son. He did most of it himself. I know. That's what scares me. She smiled. The smile carried everything. Thank you for making sure the part he couldn't do alone didn't kill him. After they left, Callan washed the dishes. 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 forks. The arithmetic of a shared meal, simple and unremarkable, carrying a weight he did not try to name because naming it would have required admitting how long it had been since the number was anything other than 1. Morning, early enough that the sky was still deciding between dark and gray. The horizon a thin line of pale gold that would widen into day if he waited, which he would, because waiting had stopped feeling like the thing he did instead of living, and started feeling like the thing living was made of. Callan stood at the southeast corner of his property, beside the monitoring well. The cap was off now, removed by the state investigation team, tagged, documented, left open. The well recorded honestly now, its sensor sending data to the county extension office, where a woman with dirt under her nails read the numbers every Tuesday and added them to a spreadsheet that would take years to tell its full story. The water table had risen 1.5 inches since the pumps shut down. 1.5 inches in 3 weeks. The earth recovering at its own pace, which had nothing to do with the pace of the people standing on top of it. He watered the cottonwood sapling he had planted beside the well. 6 feet tall, thin-trunked, its leaves small and pale green and trembling in the early wind. Sutter had given him the cutting, driven it over in his truck one morning without calling ahead, set it against the fence post with a burlap wrap around the roots, and driven away without saying more than 2 sentences. The sapling had come from Sutter's own property, a cutting from the cottonwoods his grandfather had planted in '42. Whether it was a peace offering, or a penance, or the only form of apology a farmer knew how to perform with his hands, Callan had not asked, and Sutter had not said. The water from the hose ran clear and cold over the base of the sapling and soaked into earth that received it slowly, carefully. Soil that had learned not to trust abundance and preferred to take what it was given in measured, verifiable amounts. The smell of wet earth rose around him, clean and mineral. The smell of recovery, slow and unsentimental. Finn sat beside him. The dog had followed him out through the screen door at the first sound of the hose uncoiling, tags clicking on the workshop step, and taken his position at Callan's left side. Always the left. Always close enough that a hand could find the thick fur at his neck without reaching. Always facing the same direction as the man he had decided 3 years ago in an adoption kennel at Air Station Cape Cod belonged to him. "Morning, buddy." Finn looked up, one ear up, one ear sideways. The tilt he gave to statements that did not require contradiction. Callan turned off the hose, coiled it, set it against the fence post beside the sapling. He looked out across the field. The wheat stubble stood in neat rows that caught the early light low to the ground, gold on brown. And beyond the field, the land stretched flat to the horizon, where the sky began its long, unbroken ascent into blue. To the south, thunderheads were building. Tall, white-topped, their bases darkening with the weight of the water they carried. Not close. Not today, maybe. But coming. The wind shifted and brought the smell of it, ozone and wet earth from somewhere miles away, the green, alive scent of rain that had not yet fallen, but had already decided where it was going. Callan walked to the workshop step and sat down. The concrete was cool. The air smelled of motor oil and WD-40, and the faint sweetness of alfalfa from the neighbor's cut field. Inside the workshop, tools hung on the pegboard in the order he'd arranged them his first week on this land. Wrenches by size, screwdrivers by head, the good pliers separated from the junk pliers by a gap he considered a moral distinction. 3 years of order in a small space. 3 years of staying. Finn settled beside him. The dog's chin came to rest on the toe of Callan's left boot. Gravity simple, morning certain. The accumulated proof of staying somewhere long enough for a dog to learn the shape of your foot. He thought about the Coast Guard motto, Semper Paratus, always ready. He had not been ready for Kodiak. He had not been ready for a boy named Keegan in 47-degree water. He had not been ready for Jem Harkin at 4 in the morning, or a dog who dug up the truth, or a town that needed someone who understood what water did when it left, and what people did when the water was gone. He was not ready for any of it, but he had stayed, and staying, he was beginning to understand, was its own kind of rescue. Not the kind that happened in helicopters, not the kind measured in minutes and survival rates and after-action reports filed in triplicate. The kind that happened when a man stopped packing light enough to leave before dawn and started planting trees beside wells that would take decades to recover, and cooking dinner for 3 instead of 1, and answering the phone when a boy called to ask about water levels or college deadlines, or how to tie a knot that would hold. The wind moved through the stubble. Finn's breath was slow and warm against his boot. The thunderheads climbed the southern sky, carrying rain toward a county that had learned to wait for it. The cottonwood sapling trembled in the early wind, held, and did not break. Callan stayed where he was.